Omniscient Reader's Viewpoint. By Sooyoung. Chapter 276. Part 1. After the Demon King selection, the Ujonhyuk, Kim Dokja Industrial Complex became busy with reconstruction. The citizens' expressions were dark from the dangers of war. The atmosphere would have been harsher if it wasn't for the relief resources that I persuaded Baihyung to give. The clock tower is over there. Hey, watch out over there. Due to the deaths of the dukes, the citizens of other industrial complexes came over and I wasn't lacking manpower. I spent 2 days helping the citizens rebuild and the city was gradually regaining a lively atmosphere. Thank you for the help, Usanga SSI. The foundation reconstruction would have taken a longer time if it wasn't for Usanga's Arachne's web. Usanga wiped the sweat off her forehead and replied, "You should take a break, Dokja SSI. I'm fine. What about Usanga SSI? Usanga looked closely at the bandage wrapped around my chest while answering, I'm good as well. Good. It was a word used by Usanga. I stopped working as I climbed up the clock tower with Usanga and looked down at the square. Yu Jonghyuk and the other seriously injured party members were hospitalized in Eileen's ward. Young Hee-won and Lee Jae-hai were relatively well and helped with the reconstruction of the industrial complex. Meanwhile, Lee Hyun-sung was demanding to be discharged from the ward because he was all better. Thanks to the hard work over the past 2 days, the square area started to feel like a place where people lived. The schedule was tight, but the things I were doing now would be returned to me as a reward. They came. A portal had appeared in the air. There was a kid running at great speed from one side of the square. I lightly jumped down the clock tower and greeted him. Dr. Hyung. Yua. Lee Gil-young struggled in my arms. I smiled and patted his head. Have you been well? You seem a bit taller. Really? Yes, you're almost around Yusung's height now? I'll be bigger soon. It wasn't just Lee Gil-young who came through the portal. A large man fell to the floor of the square with a thud. It has been a long time, Gong Pildu SSI. Bah. Gong Pildu stared at me like he didn't care about my safety and then waved to Usanga. Usanga bowed her head with a slight smile and Gong Pildu spoke in a slightly more relaxed tone. I didn't come to see you. During this time, Gong Pildu had changed a lot. Who could call him one of the 10 evils now? Han Sooyoung? I think she needs some time to recuperate. Lee Gil-young answered with his head against my stomach. Recuperate. She had offered the abyss stones as a sacrifice, but the damage wouldn't be small because she took the black dragon into her body. However, to not come here. Sooyoung Nuna told me to give this to you. Lee Gil-young rummaged through his pockets and handed me a note. It was a crumpled piece of paper that gave off an obstinate impression similar to Han Sooyoung. I carefully opened the note while avoiding Lee Gil-young's glistening eyes. I will kill you if you make me do it again next time. I couldn't help laughing. Indeed, there was a reason she hadn't come. If I closed my eyes, I could still see the bandaged Han Sooyoung laughing like crazy. There are still a few problems left. The note contained some other information. There were things about the Korean peninsula and the nebulae that could only be heard on Earth. Fortunately, the situation on Earth didn't deviate much from the original cycle I knew. In fact, most of the information were things I already knew and didn't need to be conveyed. Han Sooyoung knew this and struggled with eloquence. Anyway, that's it. Well, goodbye, idiot. See you when you come to Earth. It was too bad. I was going to tease her properly if we met this time. I put the note in my coat and told Lee Gil-young and Gong Pildu. There will be a party at night. Go wash up and prepare. Party? Guests are coming. I'd passed one crisis, but the crisis of this industrial complex was just beginning. The constellation God of Wine and Ecstasy has accepted your invitation. The constellation, Queen of the Darkest Spring, has accepted your invitation. I saw numerous indirect messages pouring in and sighed lightly. Since the selection, Yu Jonghyuk hadn't woken up. How long will it take for him to recover? It should take 2 more weeks. Aileen checked Yu Jong-hyuk's pulse, laked out of the hospital room and glanced at me. You need to rest as well. Do you know? Don't worry. Aileen left, but I stayed in Yu Jong-hyuk's hospital room. The sleeping man's complexion was paler than any Yu Jong-hyuk I had ever seen. It was natural. This was the first time that Yu Jong-hyuk didn't regress, despite suffering injuries serious enough to trigger regression. I stood up and checked the story packs that were stuck to him. Sometimes, a story pack being inserted incorrectly could cause death from side effects. It might be different if he had Lamarck Kieran like me. Packs like these are being plugged in. I am going to a lonely world. The sword master was the easiest. I was a genius since receiving the sword at 5 years old. Fortunately, Aileen was a story expert and had a good grasp on the composition. In fact, Yu Jong-hyuk of the 144th round briefly went crazy after wrongly receiving Lee Hyun-sung's army story. He is a picky guy. I was almost shocked by the voice suddenly heard behind me. I looked back and saw a handsome giant leaning against the wall. Since when were you there? From before you come in. The Breaking the Sky Sword Saint stared down at me with calm eyes, before indicating Yu Jong-hyuk. It is too much healing. Just throw a few mirum dumplings at him and he will get better soon. It is because there are no mirum dumplings here. Despite the words, the eyes of the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint were still very mild. Then the terrible man's voice was heard. So he is the one who beat you up. Something the size of a frog was hanging upside down from the ceiling opposite the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint. It was Kyrios Rodgraim. Master. Tell me. Is it this guy? I was reminded of the nonsense I spoke to send Kyrios to Murim. I was beat up by the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint's disciple. Kyrios' handsome eyebrows curved and the aura of electrification appeared around his entire body. Was it all a lie? I gulped and opened my mouth. It wasn't completely a lie. In fact, I'm not on good terms with this guy. I was actually beaten up. You were just beaten up? Of course, I hit back. It was a loophole in the system, but I didn't lie because I had beaten up Yu Jong-hyuk in the absolute throne battle. The Breaking the Sky Sword Saint made an intrigued expression as she listened to the story. HRMM. You beat my disciple? Then who won? The gazes of the new teachers met in the air. It was only their gazes collided, but the sense of space seemed to distort and sparks flew. I thought the two of them were getting along better with each other, but it seemed to be my mistake. The Breaking the Sky Sword Saint's voice was cold. That is a stupid question. Just looking at the face, it is obvious that my disciple is better than yours. My disciple can't be weaker than an aura parasite who only raises muscle. Don't look down on my vision of my martial artists. Your martial artists are getting smaller. I thought the hospital room would explode if this continued and quickly stepped in between the two of them. I have something to ask you. The fearsome gazes shot towards me at the same time. I raised my status and barely endured the pressure. What happened to First Murim? I was curious. The Breaking the Sky Sword Saint and Kyrios were here, so I knew Murim was likely to be safe. However, the opponent was an outer god. The first one to speak was Kyrios. This body moved personally, and you think I can't save one world? Kyrios flew out the window like he was offended. What was wrong with him? The Breaking the Sky Sword Saint gazed at the window that Kyrios had disappeared through and replied, We stopped it, but it is hard to say that we stopped it. Did you defeat the outer god? The aura of a giant story could be felt from the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint's body. It was clearly a giant story associated with First Murim. The Breaking the Sky Sword Saint nodded. It was a daunting opponent, but it wasn't something I couldn't fight. That unlucky paradox was also present. Only the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint could describe an outer god as a daunting opponent. The problem was the next guy. The outer gods also had ranks. So to speak, there were different names for them. For example, Old One and Great Old Ones. He was neither old or great old. However, there were also distant beings beyond such categories. I have never seen such an existence before, so I can't explain it clearly. The only thing certain is that Paradox and I together couldn't beat it. In fact, it wasn't even a fight. If it hadn't withdrawn itself, we would have disappeared from the universe along with Murim. The words of the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint were strange. According to the development of the original novel, there was no such possibility that such an outer god would appear in First Murim that day. Yet such a great outer god appeared and withdrew. It disappeared like it found another delicious prey. A being that was neither old or a great old one. An outer god that forced strong people such as the Breaking the Sky Sword Saint and Curios to freeze. Wah! A small party was currently in progress in the central hall of the industrial complex. The recovered party members had gathered. The symbolic bodies of some invited constellations could be seen. Demon King of Salvation. Did you receive the gift I sent? Persephone approached with a mischievous smile. Once again, her symbolic body took Yusenga's appearance. The party members stared at her symbolic body with surprise. In particular, Yusenga's expression was a delight to see. I don't like garter belts anymore. Persephone wore a Chinese dress and waved her fan while laughing. Is that so? It was a pretty good performance. Li Hyunsung's ears pricked up at the word performance. I spoke quickly, before the wrong words could come out. I am indebted to you regarding the selection game. I didn't do anything? I know that you persuaded the master of the Skywalk. Now Olympus was in a divisive state. If she hadn't persuaded Hermes, I might have had to fight more Olympus constellations in the competition. Think of it as an investment in the future. The smiling Persephone headed to the center of the hall and started dancing. She even pulled Yusenga over as her partner. At first, Yusenga was embarrassed, but then she kept a cool expression. Yonghee-won whistled. Yusenga SSI is cool. Dionysus had already finished his 10th drink in the corner, while Chiak Junyoung was sharing a cup of soju with the brash swamp predator. It was a small party, but it was more relaxed than any other party I had attended. It is a precious break. Congratulations, Demon King of Salvation. I turned back and saw an old man in a formal suit. You came, mass production maker. He was also one of the constellations who helped in this selection. I saw your story well. The Gourmet Association is making a huge fuss. You're overpraising me. I grabbed a glass from the table and bumped cups with the mass production maker. It was pretty strong alcohol, based on the smell, and I poured it into my mouth. We were silent for a moment. Perhaps the mass production maker was choosing his question. The question was why he and the other constellations attended this party, and why I held it. The mass production maker sipped the alcohol before speaking. You got the qualification of the end, so the filtering should be turned off. I could feel a fine change in the atmosphere. I nodded. That's right. The hall was still buzzing, but the eyes of the constellations gathered one by one on me. Persephone, Chiak Junyoung, Dionysus. Everyone was pretending not to care, but they were listening to this story. The gazes of all the constellations focused on me, and the mass production maker asked, "Can I ask what your was?" Chapter 277. Part 2. What was my? I knew that the mass production maker would ask that question. Are you curious? Is there anyone here who isn't curious? The mass production maker laughed lightly, and several constellations coughed. The atmosphere grew unusual, and the other party members who weren't aware of the situation started to pay attention to me. Why is everyone suddenly? Shoo! Li Hyunsung tried to intrude only to be stopped by Yonghee-won. I slowly looked around at all the people in the room. All of a sudden, everyone in the hall was watching me. There were various names for it in ways of survival. For example, the Dakibi King said, "The end of every story and the beginning." However, this was what Yu Jonghyuk had to say. The damn star stream. Li Hyunsung would describe it as the whole region, while Yusenga might say, old design. It would be graduation for Lee Jai-hai. Surprisingly, all these interpretations of weren't wrong. The mass production maker asked, all those who have earned the qualification of the end have received a different name of the end. Do you know? It is natural since all your stories are different. In the first place, there wasn't a proper noun capable of communicating in the proper sense. The fact that the filtering was resolved meant that I could read it. Perhaps the constellations who received a hidden scenario like me were probably in a similar position. Plus, hidden scenario, a single story. Category, hidden. Difficulty? Clear condition, complete one story to reach. Time limit. Compensation? Failure? Asterisk currently, you have completed the initial portion. Asterisk see the additional scenario description for details. Plus, the hidden scenario, a single story. This scenario was given to all those who obtained the qualification of the end. In the galaxy of the distant star stream, we went through numerous stories and completed a single perfect story. The legendary stories, the mythical stories, and even the giant story that I got were just a journey towards this single story. The mass production maker in front of me and Persephone over there would have received this scenario. Of course, the place where they finally arrived was different from me. But Bayu blocked the channel of the hall before I even directed her. Perhaps Bayu instinctively realized that the story to be told from now on was important. The protests of the constellations flowed through the air and the mass production maker spoke in a heavy tone. My eyes dried up. I was a bit surprised because I didn't think he would reveal his hand so easily. Then the dancing Persephone also spoke. I am death. Dried up and death. Both were words that could symbolize the end of something. It was a paradoxical end for the mass production maker who liked to make something and for Persephone who governed the world of the dead. Now that they revealed their cards, I had nowhere to retreat. Everybody, please swear by your modifiers. You will never speak of what you heard here. The constellations glanced at each other. Of course. What is this? Why would we go somewhere and say it? How great is that you are feeling such pressure? I didn't answer immediately and just smiled. Then a ripple started among the constellations. Don't tell me? The thoughts in the constellations' heads seemed to be visible. I looked at their expressions and thought. Yes, think about it. Be worried and suspicious. That way I would get the picture I desired. As the agitation of the drunk constellations reached the peak, I slowly opened my mouth. Sooyoung walked down the street. They were the ruins of Seoul. There were no survivors on the streets, and she was walking alone. All types of delusions passed through her head. Why was she here now? She had obviously been fighting with the constellations using the Black Dragon. No, rather, Seoul had been closed off. Why? Black Dragon? The abyssal black flame dragon didn't answer. Hey, is anybody there? Sooyoung wandered between the ruined buildings and shouted. The corpses of monsters hung between the familiar buildings of Gwangwon. Sooyoung shuddered every time she passed between nasty-smelling corpses. Every one of them was a monster she couldn't face right now. How? What happened? There was no one to answer her questions. No, she thought it would be better not to have answers, even if someone was here. If there was a living being here, they would be the terrifying monster who killed these monsters. If this was a dream, please wake up. Then a shadow of a person could be seen in the distance. It was a familiar humanoid form dressed in a white coat. Her heart was full of complicated emotions. Kim Dokja. The moment the person looked back, there was the sound of flesh being pierced and a knife suddenly burst out of the coat. The white coat was dyed red. Sooyoung screamed as she woke up from her sleep. Hawk, Hawk. She blinked a few times and her sense of reality slowly returned. What? She couldn't help talking to herself. Her back was wet with sweat. The constellation Abyssal Black Flame Dragon is satisfied with your soliloquy. The constellation Abyssal Black Flame Dragon believes that you have now truly become his successor. Shut up. The Black Dragon was speaking bullshit, so this seemed to be reality. Han Sooyoung placed a hand against her temple. Why was that person in her dream? Han Sooyoung would have usually passed over the dream, but it was a world where superstition became reality. Thus, this dream couldn't be overlooked. Shortly afterwards, she noticed the bandage around her arm. God damn it. It hasn't been solved yet. Don't loosen it. You are still wounded. She looked back with astonishment and saw a woman standing there. Kim Dokja's mother? You are the only one who still calls me that. Lee Sooyoung wiped Han Sooyoung's back and forehead with a towel. Han Sooyoung asked, why didn't you go to the demon world? What type of face would I have to go there? Kim Dokja would have liked it. He would have liked it more if you went. You don't know your son very well. Han Sooyoung stuck out her small lips. Lee Sooyoung laughed lightly and replaced the wet pillow with a new one. Han Sooyoung sniffed the new pillow and said, it seems to be resolved well. What are you talking about? Kim Dokja's big disaster. Seeing the Black Dragon's ecstatic state, things on the demon world side seemed well. The damage on the Korean peninsula wasn't greater than expected. There was a blow to the area, but the citizens were safely evacuated. The dream troubled her, but a dream was just a dream. It isn't over. Eh? Lee Sooyoung brought over a plate without speaking and pointed to the good or bad luck, disaster, or happiness fortune floating on it. Han Sooyoung read the characters rising to the surface of the water. She couldn't believe it. Thus, she asked Lee Sooyoung to repeat the divination many times. They were all the same. Han Sooyoung looked down at the arm wrapped with a bandage and declared, please contact Kim Dokja. The night after the party ended, I sat alone in the office. Normally, it would be a good time to read Ways of Survival while relaxing with a cup of hot chocolate. However, I couldn't afford it now. I was staring at a huge debris lying on the table. It was a pierce that came off from the last car that Surya and I fought in. I closed my eyes and tried to reconstruct my memories of the time. Surya's train was much shorter than the mythical train. In addition, the last car had a hole in the back. It was as if part of the train had been ripped off. In other words, that space wasn't the original last car. I opened my eyes and examined the wounds on the debris fragment again. There was something powerful enough to pull off part of Surya's train that my party members and teachers barely broke. It was also that. Knock knock knock. I looked up at the sound of knocking and saw Yusenga watching me from the door. I'm sorry, Dokja SSI. Am I disturbing you? No. I called you. I urgently arranged the table and greeted Yusenga. Yusenga looked around with a slightly shaky expression and then sat carefully on the other side of the table where I was sitting. Would you like some tea? Nope. It's fine. Then do you want water? Okay. We silently faced each other across the small table. I called her, but I couldn't easily bring up the topic. Yusenga must have many questions for me as well. I told her, just ask. In fact, I'd been thinking about Dokja SSI for quite some time. Her tone sounded like she had been waiting. Why do you know the future that others don't know? How could you be so calm in such situations and always find answers that others haven't thought of? Then did you find out something? I seem to know some things while others don't feel right. Perhaps Yusenga had been studying me. Just as she studied Spanish with the app, Yusenga would have studied people. As always, she reached meaningful results before anyone else. To Dokja SSI, is this world like a novel? Why do you think that? It is because of what you said at the party. As expected from Yusenga. Really, that was the only thing I could say. I'm heading towards the final chapter. That was my answer to what I received. The final chapter. The end of every book that needed to be reached by turning over the pages. Yusenga continued speaking. The constellations were greatly surprised. There were some who were amazed and some who were shocked. The constellations had to feel surprised. It was a statement I gave with such intentions. After Dr. SSI left, I asked the Queen of the Underworld. "Why are you so surprised?" "What did she say?" "She said Dr. SSI is very special." Usanga moistened her lips with the water and continued, "I heard that every being is given a different form of. In addition, most of them are very personal words. There are numerous in the world, but I heard that words that imply the end are extremely rare. Anyone who heard it would understand it meant an obvious end. It was a word that had excellent versatility for all beings. In addition, all beings who received such a clear end were great constellations like Olympus, Vedas, and Papyrus, the top deities of the massive nebulae. Now, Dr. SSI has become one of them." Usanga was staring at me with complicated eyes. Her trembling eyes held feelings that she herself couldn't measure. I replied, "It is a good thing." "It is good? Now I can finally try something." I smiled. However, Usanga didn't smile back. After the destruction of the world, I thought Dr. SSI was happier. "You laughed more often than before and seemed more vigorous, thus, you looked good." By the way, Usanga bowed her head. "Dr. SSI, why do you think this world is fiction?" Usanga didn't know me. What was fiction to me? What did this world mean to me? I couldn't explain or describe it. I'm sorry, Dr. SSI. I was presumptuous. Nevertheless, the only person who could tell me such things was Usanga. She was a person who noticed things that nobody cared about. The exclusive skill character list is activated. She was the first colleague I met. Maybe it was before this world began. The person's information can't be accessed through character list. There was an unexpected sense of relief from the rising message. Currently collecting information about the corresponding figure. When I first used character list on Usanga, I had been very anxious because I couldn't read her information. Why was it now the opposite? I sighed lightly and looked out the window. It was a clear sky. This was a world where nothing had happened yet. Usanga SSI, I'd like to ask you to do something. Thus, now was the only time to prepare. Chapter 278. Part 3. The Nebula Eden. This nebula was composed of the angels of the apocalypse, was the scourge of the demons and the eternal enemies of the demon world. The guardians of the celestial world, the angels who didn't fear any evil in this world. However, there was something that the angels of this fearsome Eden hated. Elder, in Eden you are fully prepared and bid your time before the battle. It was Metatron's ordnance time. Today, the one in charge of the lecture was the commander of the Red Cosmos, Jophiel. We urge you not to fall for the demon's two-faced war tactics. Gabriel tapped the floor with his heel and frowned. Oh, why must it be that person today? There were thousands of low-ranked angels in the training ground of Eden. The archangels like Gabriel were positioned at the forefront as teaching assistants. Lily Pin of Aquarius, Gabriel. Guardian of Youths and Travel, Raphael. Friend of Justice and Harmony, Rigel. Apart from the archangel on duty, most of the top-ranking constellations of Eden were assembled. Jophiel's mental training had already been going on for an hour. Gabriel secretly yawned and looked around at his colleagues with languid eyes, only to notice something strange. Hey, where's Uriel? Raphael, who was nodding off on the cloud, replied while fixing his curly hair. She is being detained. Detained? She is being told off by the scribe. Don't you know? What did she do? Raphael borrowed the power of the wind to speak like it was annoying. Gabriel's eyes widened. What? Really? Uriel? Yes, yes. She is banned from broadcasting for 3 years. That Uriel was going to be confined for 3 years? Gabriel laughed at the unexpected news. For the time being, the broadcast bulletin board will be clean. The ordinance ended after 30 minutes. Metatron dismissed the low-grade angels and called the archangels separately. Scribe of Heaven Metatron had gray hair that went down to his waist and his expression seemed tired today. It was because he was busy trying to prevent the possibility of Armageddon. Metatron pushed up his thin frame glasses and spoke, "Thank you for the trouble, Jophiel. It was a good presentation." Jophiel nodded. Metatron looked around at the archangels and asked, "Uriel didn't come? Didn't you detain her? Otherwise, she would be here." The other archangels giggled at Gabriel's words. However, Metatron didn't laugh. The archangels exchanged looks with each other. There was no angel here who didn't know that Uriel was a headache for the scribe. The first one to speak was Archangel Raguel, who had faint freckles on his cheeks. "Excuse me, scribe. Isn't 3 years of detainment too much? Recently Uriel has become quite bright due to the broadcast. For the constellations who had to endure the boring years, the meaning of the live broadcast was immense. Some angels called the live stream broadcasting the only drug allowed in Eden." "What are you saying, Raguel? Do you know how many times the scribe let that watch?" Raguel's expression hardened at Gabriel's words. "Gabriel. Insulting a fellow angel is a felony. Did I say something wrong?" When she was bored, she picked up a demon's neck and did something strange. "Gabriel." It was Metatron who calmed down the tense atmosphere. "I will decide how to deal with Uriel." The sublime aura rising from Metatron caused all the excited angels to close their mouths. As the surroundings became silent, Metatron brought up the main point. "In connection to the Demon World Convention, I'm going to give you a new assignment." The Demon World Convention. The expressions of the archangels became tense. The balance between Eden and the demon world had been shaken by the recent armed conflict in the 73rd demon realm. "We need an archangel to monitor the ruler of the 73rd demon realm, the demon king of salvation." Confusion filled the angels' faces. Gabriel asked in a sharp voice, "Wait, isn't that originally Uriel's mission? And what does it have to do with the Demon World Convention?" "It is relevant. Now that Uriel is being detained, other archangels need to do her work." Metatron's gaze moved across the archangels. Raphael had a doctrines tour next week and Raguel is scheduled to visit Vedas, so the mission. The scribe's eyes finally stopped on one archangel. "Me?" In the days after the party members enjoyed a sudden luxury. "Dr. SSI, can I accept something like this? I bought it for Hyunsung SSI." Kim Dokja bought clothes or items for the party members every day from the Dakibi Bad, as if compensation for his absence in the meantime. The kids were particularly excited. "Hey, look at this Shin Yu-sung. I received it as well." Shin Yu-sung and Lee Gil-young laughed and ran through the streets, while covered with accessories bought by Kim Dokja. Young Hee-won saw the scene and laughed. The kids looked like a Christmas tree. The two children were sitting on Lee Hyunsung's big shoulders. The same was true for Lee Hyunsung. He was excited about the new shield he received from Kim Dokja. "Three fools," she muttered as she looked around and saw Lee Jae-hai approaching while wearing a triangular gimbap-like helmet on her head. If the other three were like a Christmas tree, she was a three-tier cake. "Do you have a good relationship with Dokja Juicy these days? I have belatedly realized the importance of colleagues." Lee Jae-hai narrowed her eyes at Young Hee-won's reaction. "Uni, perhaps you haven't received anything?" "I don't need it." In fact, Kim Dokja had visited Young Hee-won several times. However, he didn't give her any items and only taught her a few training methods as well as telling her about hidden pieces. She told him that they were things she could do without him, and Kim Dokja's expression was still vivid in her mind. She was going to give Lee Jae-hai some honey when someone poked her shoulder. She looked back and saw the tired Kim Dokja. "Ah, Dokja SSI." Kim Dokja had dark circles on his face as he held out something towards Young Hee-won. "This? It is a new suit. It will be more comfortable for you." Young Hee-won accepted the clothes in a daze. It was a blue-black special suit with a large cloak. She had seen it at the exchange, but gave up because it was too expensive. "The clothes are too expensive. I still have enough. Kim Dokja silently shook his head. Young Hee-won saw his unknown facial expression and recalled a memory from a long time ago. During the days at Chungmuro, she received an outfit from Kim Dokja. At the time, it was a rag. The constellation Bald General of Justice is disappointed with incarnation Young Hee-won. You agreed to be my sword. I should do at least this much for you. Kim Dokja said these words and instantly walked away like he had something else happening. Young Hee-won stared at Kim Dokja's back and touched the special uniform in her hands. Lee Jae-hai grinned from next to her. Uni's mouth. What? Nothing, I just found something from the corners of your mouth. Uni, if you don't like it, then exchange it with my helmet. That suit is really romantic. I don't want to. She looked closer and saw a pattern on the suit that was similar to Lee Hyun-sung's shield. Made by Yengu-san. Young Hee-won wasn't fluent in English, scratched her head and gave up reading. In any case, it was good. By the way, why is a Juicy suddenly doing this? The person who sold food for money. I don't know. He might be plotting something strange like before. It certainly wasn't strange if it was Kim Dokja. He gave her such a good item that he would definitely put her to tremendous use. Young Hee-won looked at the suit and felt like an office worker who received a salary advance. She was discussing with Lee Jae-hai how to wear the coat more stylishly when someone appeared and passed her like a ghost. Sanga SSI, what's going on? Huh? Ah, yes. It's nothing. Yu Sanga, who was staring blankly into space, reacted with surprise. Her pupils were empty. Young Hee-won realized that something was strange and tried to speak, but Lee Jae-hai was one step faster. Aha, I understand. Sanga Uni hasn't received an item? Young Hee-won poked Lee Jae-hai's ribs and she let out a light shriek. Yu Sanga smiled helplessly. I just have many thoughts these days. Hee-won SSI, that is a wonderful outfit. Ah, yes. Dokja SSI gave it. I think it is too much to wear it. I think it suits you very well. Is that so? Thank you. Young Hee-won scratched his head. There was a shining bracelet that hadn't been seen before on Yu Sanga's wrist. The mood became awkward and Young Hee-won asked awkwardly, alright, how is Dokja SSI lately? Dokja SSI? Yu Sanga's expression asked what she meant. Young Hee-won, who might have been misinformed, started speaking gibberish. I mean. I just wanted to know if the two of you are doing well. Yu Sanga cocked her head to one side and muttered, I think it is the same as when we were in the company. Was similar to when they were at the company. It was a difficult response for a hopeful observer. Lee Jae-hai whispered to Young Hee-won. Didn't I tell you before? There is nothing between them. Dokja Juicy's taste doesn't go that way. I understand why my sponsor likes you. By the way, has your master woken up? Not yet. I heard it would take a few more days. In the distance, Kim Dokja seemed to be talking to himself as he headed towards the ward. Is there something to give? The clock tower was on the verge of completion. The boisterous laughter of the party members could be heard. Gong Pildu was dissecting something like a machine gun while Han Myung-go was testing a new prosthetic leg. Without knowing why, Young Hee-won felt overwhelmed. In any case, the party was all gathered now. They would soon return to Earth and go through the hellish scenarios again. Even so, Young Hee-won was afraid. Young Hee-won watched the sunset from the clock tower and recalled the words she heard in the theater dungeon. I wish to see the novel's epilogue. At the time, the Kim Dokja who said these words seemed very lonely. She didn't know what he meant at the time, but now she felt like she knew a bit. Now one thing was clear. When the epilogue came, Kim Dokja wouldn't be alone. It was a few days after the part ended. The constellations present in the industrial complex started to leave one by one. I went to see the constellations off and found 2 flowers in the chest pocket of my coat. What is this? It was a pair of red cosmos and a lily. It wasn't a very suitable combination. Did the kids do it? I took care of the flowers and headed towards the square. Some constellations had already passed through the portal. Among those leaving were constellations who signed a special contract with the Kim Dokja's company Nebula, including the old man in front of me. It looks like you're preparing for war. You don't have to be so impatient. In the scenario, it is always war. The mass production maker chuckled at my words. Don't be senseless. I want you to be different from the other constellations. Thank you for the help. I smiled and bowed my head. The mass production maker opened the door of the car before stopping and looking at me. There is one final thing I want to ask. Yes. Feel free to ask. The mass production maker didn't immediately ask the question. Instead, he pulled out a cigarette and mumbled. Have you ever thought about what exactly is? He turned on his lighter and touched the end of the cigarette to the flame. The mass production maker sighed and blew out smoke before continuing. Is it the place we want to reach or the place destiny is leading us to? Is it a place, a life, or a space? Perhaps the mass production maker had thought about this question countless times. Finally, he wouldn't have found the answer. The certain thing is that it is the end of the story. Sometimes I find your calmness amazing. I'm nervous as well. I felt it at the time of the Gourmet Association, but you're not as good at lying as you think. The mass production maker laughed like a child. Then I'm asking you, is your really the final chapter? The words broke through my guard. I reflexively shut my lips. The mass production maker waited patiently for my answer. I finally opened my mouth once the mass production maker's cigarette was burned halfway through. I don't know where the story will take me. However, I'm sure that the place I want to go is the final chapter. He continued to listen after I finished. It was as if my story was still ongoing. Once the remaining cigarette had been burned, the mass production maker laughed. I hope that I'm on the last page with you. Go carefully, old man. Be careful. There was a light engine sound and the mass production maker's car slipped into the portal. The other constellations also disappeared into the portal. The portal closed and ominous sparks filled the empty sky. I watched the sparks and touched the petals in my pocket. Now the remaining time was 3 days. Soon, the most important story of the industrial complex would begin.